Hey there, this is Chris Sev from Better Dev. In this video, let's talk about using Tailwind to build out this simple login form. Now, this isn't the most flashy login form, and there's a lot more that we can do to spruce it up, but I think that all the techniques that we'll use in this video will help us understand Tailwind and help us get on the road to building out even cooler Tailwind login forms and signup forms. Let's get started. All right, so let's start building out our login form. We have a brand new code pen here. I'm going to go into the CSS settings and load up the Tailwind CSS right here. I'll type in Tailwind and Tailwind will pop up, and I'll just click that to add the tailwind.min.css file to our code pen. And now that we have it, we don't need CSS or the JavaScript here because we're not doing any custom CSS or custom JavaScript, all thanks to Tailwind. To start us off, I always like doing for these demos a big container where we center everything. Usually you wouldn't do this in your project since you would have a container for your login form. But since here in a CodePen we don't have a container, let's go ahead and create one. So I'm going to say, I'm going to use Emmet. And if you're interested in Emmet, which is an HTML kind of shorthand tool, I've got a free course that I'll link below. And we'll do .min height screen. And let me actually increase the size of this. Let's go down here. Let's go up to 20. Maybe even further, 26. Okay. So we'll do min height screen. I'll do dot flex items center and justify center. So that should center everything. Let's give this a background of blue at 100. And I'll press tab. And that will auto complete all of that thanks to Emmet. And we'll get this nice blue background. Maybe we can go a little bit darker, 400. All right, I like that. So here is where we're going to put the login form. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say div is going to be the thing that encompasses our entire login form. And let's give this a class of background white, padding of 8 all the way around. So I like doing the box classes first. So background, padding, some spacing like margin. Here, let's do rounded. Let's do a shadow 2XL. So that looks pretty good right there. And what we can also do is we can force this to have a width, which I'm not really the biggest fan of because we want this to be a fluid thing, but we can say width 1/2 right here. So that's width 1/2 and it's automatically centered thanks to these flexbox classes right here. And let's start doing our form. So in our form, we're going to need an H2 that says create your account. So I guess this is a sign up form and somewhat of a login form. So we have create your account here. I'm going to do all of the HTML first, and then we'll go back up and start styling it all out. So we're going to have a form in here. No action because this form doesn't really go anywhere. Ideally, you would have the action go to a PHP backend, or you would process this form with JavaScript with something like React, and you could do all that in your JavaScript code. But since here we don't really have much of that going on, we're just going to do a form. We're going to have a div right here, and I'm going to do a div, and let's put a label in there for name. Let's put an input type is text here, and that'll be the name. And then we'll copy this whole thing right here. I'm going to go down email and password. So let's do email and password. And then we'll also have a button down here. Let's do div class, or sorry, button type is submit. But since we are in an HTML form, this button will automatically be of type submit. So we don't have to write that. Create your account. Or we can just say sign up. Oh, and the one thing I'm missing here is let's do a div right here. I'll do a div for input type is, and I'm going to reverse these because we want the checkbox to happen first. Checkbox. And then label is right there for something like I agree to the terms and privacy. All right, so that's going to be our HTML. We can do a little bit more with this. We can do like a label for is equal to name, and we can add that ID here for name. So now whenever we click this label, it'll focus on that input, and we for sure should do that on the checkbox here. So we're going to say ID is going to be agree, and then here we're going to say for is going to be agree. So now when we click on the label here, it'll actually check and not check the checkbox. You can do the same for all the other ones. We won't really focus on that because our styling is what we want to focus on. But that's going to be a good base for our HTML form. Now let's get to styling it. So let's start with our H2. I want to focus on the sizing of it. Let's do text 4XL. Let's do font is bold. And 4XL might be a little large in our little code pen here. So I'll drop to 3XL. We definitely want to give this a margin bottom of maybe 8. Give it a good margin. Let's go for a text color of purple at maybe 800. So there we go there. And this margin bottom 8 might be a little long. So let's go 4. And if you're doing these calculations, if you want to kind of guesstimate it, each number in a Tailwind numbering scheme kind of corresponds to 4 pixels. So that'll be about 16 pixels right there. And that's kind of how I like to visualize and calculate in my head. All right, so we have the form here. We have our div. So we could go in and let's talk about spacing on these, right? We want class is equal to margin bottom of maybe 3 so that this name one has margin bottom below it. But we can also do that on the next one and the next one and the next one. That's a little tedious, especially if we start maneuvering around our form. So what we can do is we can go on this top level here and say class space y of 3. And that will put spacing in between all of the children of this form right here. So that's a really good touch. Let's see, for name, let's make these actually block levels. Name class is block. And that will mean that the input will sit below it instead of side by side. And this is all preference. If you wanted them to sit side by side, you could remove that and then add a margin right of 2. But you can't really see our input right. So let's do background, or let's do a border of border gray at 400. So now you can see the input. So if I go back here and say block, and that will have a margin right of 2. Now we don't need the margin right of 2. We need to bring that to the margin bottom of 2. So that will space it out. But all your preference, if you want a kind of label on top of the input, you can do that. If you want it on the left, you can remove the block class. So here I'm going to keep them on top of each other. I'm going to increase our space Y to maybe like 5 or 6. Let's drop this margin bottom 1. I want those a little closer. And now let's style this. Let's go font bold and text small. There we go. That looks okay. I think text small we can drop. And this is kind of how I play around with the Tailwind classes. I kind of just click and see what looks best in the moment. A lot of people will design in Figma or something beforehand, and I absolutely love that approach. For me, I like jumping right into the code, and that's all personal preference. So here, let's go ahead and add a little bit of padding to this. Padding Y of 2, padding X of 4. Maybe I need to adjust that. Yeah, padding X is a little long on the sides. So let's just do 2 or 3 all the way around. Okay, so that looks good there. Let's do a full width here. So I'm just going to say block, and that'll give that the full width. So I'm going to say width is full right there. And that'll go all the way over. And then I'm going to round out these corners. So let's do rounded large. Actually, just normal rounded, no rounded large. That looks good. And then let's give a little bit more margin on the name right there. And now that we're starting to see this thing kind of take place, we can give ourselves a little bit more spacing, because spacing is a really, really great way to make a design go from good to great. So let's add in a little bit more spacing here. Let's do 16 maybe. And let's increase the size here to 2/3. especially when we're stuck in this code pen, we should have a larger kind of room to play with. Let's bring up the margin bottom on the H2. Let's go to 10. And then let's bring up the space Y to 10. That's actually a little bit large, so let's go to 8. Okay, so now what we're doing here is that we are clicking into our input. Let's make sure that we can style out our input to be a little bit nicer. If we type into this, let's give this an outline of none. So when we click it, it won't really show that we're typing into it. So we definitely want this to show a little bit better. So we can actually say focus. Let's give this a border of blue at 400. So if I click into this, it shows the border right there, and it kind of shows that we're typing into it. You could even give it a background if you're typing into it, or you can, let's bring up the border size. So let's do border 2. And on normal, border 2, let's do gray 200 and then blue at 500. So there we go, which I guess kind of looks like the outline that we just removed. So let's make this a little bit more fun. Let's go to purple. There we go. And then let's bring down our purple on the header to maybe 700 just to get it a little bit more of a purple tint. Cool. All right. The last thing I want to do is let's bring down the text color here. So let's do text gray at maybe 700. I don't want that to be just pure black. Maybe even lower to maybe 500. Okay, there we go. So that's looking good there. And what we can do here is pretty much take both of these right here, apply it to the email, and apply it to the password. But we still have to go in here and change this to email of type, and type is password here. And then let's make sure we change our label again, password and email. And let me bring down the size of this. It's getting a little cramped in here. Cool. So now we have email, password, name, and that's looking okay. I think our space Y got a little bit too large. There we go. That's not so bad. So there we have name, email, and password there. All right, so let's get to this checkbox. Let's have them sit. All right, so next let's get to the checkbox. They are sitting side by side, but they're not really aligned. So let's go class, flex, and items center. So we're going to vertically align them. There we go. And now we need to give the class to the label and say margin left of 2 so that we can get a little bit of spacing there. We can also style the coloring of this. So text gray at 700 and text small. And that looks pretty good right there. So if we click that, that works, and that'll work for our checkbox. And finally, this is where you get to have a little bit of fun. The button itself, we can do class is block, so we can get that full width. Let's see where it's at. So let's go background red at 400. This is kind of how you can console log and see what's going on. So it's not the full width, so we have to say width full there. There we go. Let's give ourselves some padding. So let's go padding Y of maybe 4. And we can actually do that all the way around. Just padding 4. Let's go for rounded out on the edges. And then let's give ourselves a background of purple at the 400 range. Let's see how that looks. Let's go up to maybe 600. Maybe 400. And then let's go for a text of purple at 800. So it's still purple, and it'll stick with that purple. But let's go darker because it doesn't pop enough. There we go. The next cool thing we can do is give this a hover class. So let's go hover background purple at 300. So let's lighten it up, and then on hover, we'll keep that text. So there we go. But next, let's go for a transition, and duration is 300. So that kind of gives it a transition for the color hovering. There we go. But I'm thinking that is a little too dark, so let's cover the text purple to 800. So let's drop it a little bit so the contrast isn't so jarring. There we go. So all in all, this is actually coming together like a really nice form. Some last minute cleanup that I want to do. I think this spacing between the label and the name and the input doesn't look so good anymore. So let's do 1, 1, and 1. That I think looks a little bit better. Let's increase our space Y to 5. And then this H2 is kind of bothering me with the purple. So let's go and do a gray at 800. So let's kind of just get it up to the black almost. 800, I think, was right. And the final thing I think will make this really, really awesome is the purple doesn't really gel too well with me. So let's select all those purples and do yellow. There we go. So I think the blue and the yellow plays a little bit better. And I think that's pretty cool right there. Hopefully you learned some good things about Tailwind and applying it to real world components. I hope you like this one. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.